8 years and 4 months. That's how long Ben McLemore will be in prison after being found guilty of a woman at a house party back in 2021. The victim said in court today that she hopes this trial will be a testament that no one is above the law.
What if I told you a player who was once supposed to be the next coming of Ray Allen, who scored 36 points in a single game at Kansas and was drafted 7th overall in the NBA draft, is now serving over 8 years in prison for doing something despicable? This is the shocking rise and devastating fall of Ben McLemore, and trust me, this story gets way darker than you think. So before we get to this video, make sure you drop a like to help push this video in the algorithm, because it's probably going to get demonetized, because we're covering every detail of this tragic story, from Ben's incredible college performance that had Bill Self saying he was the most talented player he's ever coached, to the organizational chaos in Sacramento that destroyed his confidence, and finally, the fateful Lake Oswego party in 2021 that ended with a criminal conviction that resulted in ruining Ben McLemore's life. We're also giving away jerseys each and every week on this channel to a subscriber that turns on our notifications on this channel, and to Instagram followers that have our notifications on. And now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro. As a result of my brand new partnership with Fantasy Aces, we have been profiting like crazy via my new Discord server. I'm going to leave a link to it in the WAP link in the description down below. And if you haven't signed up for Prize Picks, make sure you use my promo code microphone to get a free $50 when you make a play of $5 or more. And thank you, Prize Picks, for today's sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Let's start at the beginning, because Ben McLemore's story is one of the most dramatic rags to riches to prison tales in sports history. Born on February 11th, 1993 in North St. Louis, Ben Edward McLemore III grew up in the kind of poverty that's very difficult to imagine. His family often had to choose between electricity and food. We're talking about microwaving water for warm baths, and the entire family huddling together in the living room just to stay warm during Missouri winters. His mother Sonia was essentially raising 5 children all by herself, working multiple jobs that still weren't enough to keep the lights on. Ben would say in interviews that basketball became his escape from a reality that seemed hopeless. And here's the thing, this background is crucial to understanding what happens later, because the hunger that drove him out of poverty might have also contributed to the poor decision making that eventually destroyed his life. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's talk about how this kid from the streets became a McDonald's All-American candidate. At Wellston High School, McLemore was absolutely dominant. As a junior, he posted an insane 28.3 points, 12.7 rebounds, 6.2 assists, 2.6 steals, and 2.3 blocks per game. This kid was doing everything on the court and leading the Trojans to a 3rd place finish in the 2010 Class 2 state tournament. But here's where the first red flag appears, and remember, this is going to be a pattern throughout this video. The signs were there, we were just ignoring them. Just as Ben McLemore was gaining national attention, Wellston High School closed following the 2009-10 academic year. So this kid, who was already dealing with poverty and instability, now had to find a new school. He landed at the famous Oak Hill Academy in Virginia. You know, the same prestigious program that produced Kevin Durant, Carmelo Anthony, and Rajon Rondo. This should have been his moment. But here's the thing that most people don't know. McLemore would get the boot from Oak Hill Academy in the middle of the season. The reasons were never fully made public. But think about it this way. You really have to mess up to get kicked out of a school that wants you to help them win basketball games. So Ben would finish his high school career at Christian Life Center in Texas, averaging just 16 points in 6 games. A far cry from his dominant junior year, but somehow Kansas still wanted him, and that decision would change everything. Now here's where this story gets really interesting, because what happened at Kansas shows you exactly how talented Ben McLemore was, and also reveals the character flaws that would eventually destroy him. First, we need to talk about how talented this kid was. When Ben McLemore arrived at Kansas in 2012, he couldn't even play right away. The NCAA deemed him ineligible because of all of those school transfers. They said his transcripts were a little shady, 180, so he had to redshirt his first year and was only allowed to practice while watching his teammates play games. But when he finally suited up for the 2012-13 season as a redshirt freshman, he was absolutely phenomenal. Ben would average 15.9 points, 5.2 rebounds, and 2 assists per game on remarkable shooting splits. 49.5% from the field, 42% from 3, and 87% from the free throw line, with a 42-inch vertical leap and 44 dunks in 37 games. This kid was supposed to be the #1 pick in the 2013 NBA draft. He was clearly the most talented player in the NBA draft. At least more talented than Anthony Bennett was anyway. Bill Self, who had coached players like Paul Pierce and Darren Williams, was blown away. Self told ESPN's Andy Katz that Ben's talent level is off the charts. He's as talented as just about anybody we've ever had come here. The Ray Allen comparison started flying, and Ben McLemore embraced them, saying, "I definitely can compare myself to Ray Allen, especially with my shooting ability." And then came the performance that made everyone think that he was destined for NBA stardom. March 2nd, 2013, Kansas has taken on West Virginia at Allen Fieldhouse. This is the game that put Ben McLemore on the map as a potential #1 overall pick. McLemore exploded for 36 points on 12 of 15 shooting, including 5 of 6 from three-point range. But here's what makes this even more incredible. He broke Danny Manning's Kansas freshman scoring record of 35 points, set exactly 28 years to the day. The crowd went absolutely insane. One reporter described it as McLemore showing the prettiest jump shot in college basketball, with NBA scouts frantically taking notes. But even in that magical performance, there were warning signs. Earlier in another game against Iowa State, McLemore hit a game-tying three-pointer that appeared to bank off of the backboard. When asked about it afterward, he said, "I actually kind of called bank," while Coach Self disagreed. Ben was fortunate, but he didn't call glass, I'm sure. That confusion over whether it was skill or luck, that's gonna become a metaphor for his entire career. And speaking of warning signs, there was another game that should have scared NBA scouts. In the NCAA tournament against North Carolina, when the lights were brightest and the stakes were highest, Ben McLemore went 0 for 9 from the field and was benched. 0 for 9. This wasn't just a bad shooting night, this was a complete disappearing act when his team needed the most. His tendency to fade when the spotlight was brightest would haunt his entire professional career. But NBA teams were infatuated with Ben's potential. That 36-point performance and those shooting percentages overlooked this massive red flag. But here's where the story takes another twist, because just as Ben McLemore was preparing for the NBA, a scandal broke out that should have been another warning sign about his judgment. After McLemore declared for the 2013 NBA draft, explosive allegations emerged. NBA agent Rodney Blackstock was accused of giving thousands of dollars in impermissible benefits to McLemore's AAU coach, Darius Cobb, in exchange for steering the young star towards certain financial advisors and agents. But here's what made this scandal have teeth. McLemore had Blackstock on his guest pass list for at least 3 home Kansas games that season, and then immediately signed with Blackstock as his NBA agent. The optics were horrible. The NCAA launched a full investigation to determine whether Kansas would have to vacate all the games that McLemore played in. But think about the irony here. A kid who grew up choosing between heat and food was now accused of taking money that could have jeopardized his college eligibility. For a family that had struggled to pay basic bills, the temptation of quick cash must have been overwhelming. But this was an early warning sign about McLemore's judgment and the people he surrounded himself with. Issues that would resurface years later in far more serious circumstances. Kansas ultimately avoided sanctions, but the controversy cast a shadow over what would have been McLemore's triumphant moment. And unfortunately, this was just the beginning of his problems with decision making. When the 2013 NBA draft began, McLemore was projected to be a top 3 pick. Chad Ford had him going #4 overall, while Sports Illustrated projected him 2nd overall. But then the unthinkable happened. Anthony Bennett went 1st overall to Cleveland in one of the most shocking picks in NBA history. Victor Oladipo would go #2 to Orlando. Otto Porter 3rd to Washington. Then came Cody Zeller at #4, Alex Len at #5, Nerlens Noel at #6. When Sacramento finally called McLemore's name at #7, the slide was complete. According to ESPN, Sacramento didn't have any chance at drafting McLemore with the 7th pick. The Kings didn't even bring him in for a pre-draft workout, but Sacramento taking him at 7, that should have been a blessing. Instead, it became the beginning of a nightmare that would define his entire career. And trust me, what happened next in Sacramento is going to blow your mind. But first, let me tell you why the Kings were the absolute worst possible landing spot for a player like Ben McLemore. Here's what most people don't realize about McLemore's rookie season. He wasn't just joining any NBA team, he was walking into complete organizational chaos. Kings owner Vivek Ranadive had finalized the purchase of the team 1 month before the draft. They hired Michael Malone as head coach at the end of May, and immediately after drafting McLemore, they signed and traded away Tyreke Evans, their primary ball handler. As Chuck Hayes, who mentored McLemore during his rookie season, put it, he was getting put into a whole world of change and expectations, and he had no clue what was coming. And the results were very predictable. McLemore's rookie season exposed every concern scouts should have had. He averaged just 8.8 points on 37.6% shooting, with his three-point percentage dropping from 42% in college to 32% as a pro. But here's the really damning stat that shows how bad he was defensively. Opponents shot 48.9% when he was guarding them, compared to 44.1% on average. He was terrible on defense. The franchise questioned his hands, his decision-making, his basketball IQ, but what really broke him was what happened next. On December 15, 2014, the Sacramento Kings would fire Michael Malone after starting the season 11-13. McLemore was devastated, saying that he felt like crying right there, but losing Malone wasn't even the worst part. The Kings also lost assistant coach Chris Gent, who had been working closely with McLemore on his development, and what happened next was unprecedented in terms of organizational dysfunction. McLemore would eventually play for 6 different head coaches in less than 5 seasons in Sacramento: Michael Malone, Tyrone Corbin, George Karl, and eventually Dave Yeager in 2016. McLemore would say that I'm big on someone being hands-on with me, and after those first 2 years, I felt like there was a lack of player development. The psychological toll was immense. You start seeing, oh, he's a bust, McLemore recalled, and you start to think, maybe I am a bust. The organization's doubt became a self-fulfilling prophecy. When he fell asleep on a backdoor cut, he'd get yanked immediately. His confidence dwindled as the bust label attached itself permanently, and Sacramento made it clear that they moved on when they acquired Buddy Hield and Bogdan Bogdanovic. Despite starting all 82 games in his sophomore season while averaging 12.1 points, McLemore never found his footing. But what happened next was somehow even worse. After 4 tumultuous seasons in Sacramento, McLemore signed with Memphis in July of 2017, hoping for a fresh start, but instead, disaster struck immediately. Just 1 month later, he fractured his right foot in a pickup game, ruling him out for 12 weeks. When he finally returned, he was assigned to the G League's Memphis Hustle, a humbling experience for a former lottery pick. His Grizzlies debut was pathetic: 4 points and 2 rebounds in 18 minutes in a blowout loss to Houston. By July of 2018, Memphis traded him back to Sacramento in a salary dump, using him to move Garrett Temple. McLemore was initially excited about the reunion. He told ESPN, "I was like, wow, coming back to the team who drafted me, they believed in me from the jump. A young kid from St. Louis. They're giving me the opportunity to show them why they drafted me in the first place." The optimism was misplaced. Sacramento had acquired him purely for salary cap purposes, not for basketball reasons. In his second stint with the Kings, McLemore only logged 24 minutes through the first month of the 2018-19 season, and then came the phone call that shattered what was left of McLemore's world. November 4th, 2018, Milwaukee, the visiting team's locker room. Ben McLemore was getting treatment, preparing to play that night for the Sacramento Kings, when his phone rang. His sister was crying on the other end. His brother Kevin, his closest confidant, the person who understood the struggles of growing up in poverty in St. Louis, had died unexpectedly at just 25 years old. McLemore would say that I ran into the shower and turned the water on. I just didn't know what else to do. I was just in the shower talking to myself. We were kind of like twins. We had a connection. I was almost trying to talk to him. His mother later told him that he looked like he had a black cloud over his head. Some nights he didn't want to play basketball anymore. The bus label was now permanent. 3 months after Kevin's death, Sacramento waived McLemore. The Toronto Raptors briefly showed interest, signing him to a 10-day contract, but McLemore was literally driving to the airport when his agent called with bad news. A roster technicality had killed the deal. No other deal would come. A team from China flew in a scout to watch McLemore work out. The thought of leaving the NBA for at least a year had crossed his mind. His career seemed over, but then in the summer of 2019, something incredible happened. While training at the Mamba Sports Academy, Kobe Bryant spotted Ben McLemore and asked him, "What are you doing here?" When McLemore explained that he was out of the league, Kobe's response was simple but powerful: "Stay ready, your time is gonna come." That time came in Houston when Mike D'Antoni saw something that others had missed. The Rockets signed Ben McLemore in July of 2019, betting on his shooting ability to space the floor around James Harden and Russell Westbrook. Playing alongside James Harden, who actively looked to get him shots, McLemore experienced a genuine basketball renaissance. In December of 2019, he scored 27 points on 10 of 15 shooting against Phoenix. 5 of 9 of those came from 3. The first time in his career that he had scored 25 plus points in multiple games. Against Toronto, he would explode for 28 points, hitting 8 of 17 from 3-point range, silencing years of doubt with one brilliant performance. For 81 games in Houston, McLemore looked like the player that Kansas fans remembered. He averaged 10.1 points on 40.7% 3-point shooting, providing exactly what the Rockets needed. The transformation was so complete that after the Rockets waived him, the Los Angeles Lakers gave him a chance. He would score 6 points in his debut against Miami on April of 2021, then signed with Portland that August. At age 28, playing for his 6th NBA team, there was still hope for a long career as a role player who could provide shooting off the bench. But what would happen on October 3rd, 2021 would destroy any chance of redemption and transform McLemore's motivational rags to riches story into a rotten tale about a player who could have created a great life for himself, threw it all away by making a horrible decision and doing something despicable. This one decision would transform him from NBA player to convicted felon. And I have to provide a trigger warning because the details of that night are very graphic. So if you get triggered by SA situations, this is your opportunity to click off the video. On October 3rd, 2021, Lake Oswego, Oregon, a house party at the luxurious home of Portland Trailblazers forward Robert Covington. What I'm about to tell you comes directly from court testimony and official police reports, and it's deeply disturbing. According to prosecutor Scott Healy, a 21-year-old woman became hammered, unconscious, drunk that night, consuming more alcohol than she had ever consumed in her life. Healy told jurors that it was the most intoxicated that she's ever been. She had vomited earlier in the evening. Witnesses testified that she had difficulty walking, slurred speech, and could barely lift her head. Prosecutors submitted photos as evidence showing her hovering over a toilet and then passed out on the living room couch. The victim passed out on the couch around 2 a.m., completely incapacitated. Hours later, around 6 a.m., she regained partial consciousness to find McLemore assaulting her. According to testimony, she was fading in and out of consciousness during the penetration and the intercourse. In her own words during trial testimony, "I don't know who this person is. This is a random person that is doing something like this to me." At one point during the assault, she testified that she let her body slide to the floor in an effort to stop what was happening, but McLemore pulled her back onto the couch and continued the assault. The woman reported the assault the same day and underwent a specialized medical examination designed for SA victims. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. With McLemore playing overseas and frequently traveling for basketball, the investigation was complex and drawn out. His departure from the United States delayed the case significantly, though investigators continued gathering evidence. In February of 2024, nearly 3 years after the incident, a grand jury finally heard evidence in the case, including the victim's testimony. They issued an indictment against McLemore for 1 count of first-degree rape, 1 count of first-degree unlawful penetration, and 2 counts of second-degree sexual abuse. U.S. Marshals arrested him at Portland International Airport on April 9th, 2024 as he returned to the United States. McLemore maintained his innocence, releasing a statement that he did not do it. "I am not sexually abusive. I have never pursued a relationship when I understood the woman was not interested in me and acted willingly." The trial lasted 11 days, and the details that emerged were damning. McLemore's defense team, led by attorneys Chris Weinmiller and Lisa Maxfield, claimed that the encounter was consensual and that the woman initiated contact. During closing arguments, Maxfield told jurors to find her client not guilty, describing it as the only reasonable verdict in a case where 2 people get drunk and get together and the man is drunker than the woman. But the prosecution's case was devastating. McLemore himself testified that he was also drinking but claimed that it was consensual. Notably, he admitted that he and the woman did not have a conversation before, during, or after the fact, after which he immediately left the home. One of his attorneys explained that McLemore left after receiving an angry message from his then wife, who had tracked his location and wanted to know why he wasn't at their own Lake Oswego home. Earlier in the evening, teammate Robert Covington had testified that he saw the woman flirting with McLemore while they sat on the couch together. However, this observation came hours before the assault occurred, when the victim was still conscious and capable of normal social interaction. The victim's testimony was heartbreaking. She told the court that the defendant needs to be held accountable for what he did. "You can't do that that to somebody, let alone somebody that you don't know either. You don't do that to people and just be able to get away with it. I don't care who you are. And after 10 hours of jury deliberation following the 11-day trial, the evidence was overwhelming. On July 3rd, 2025, the jury found McLemore guilty on 3 of the 4 charges: first-degree first-degree unlawful penetration, and second-degree abuse. He was acquitted on only 1 count of second-degree abuse. District Attorney John Wentworth emphasized that celebrity status provided no protection. We recognize there are those who fear individuals with celebrity status or a position of prominence can avoid prosecution, but not in this county. This case demonstrates that my office prosecutes criminal acts regardless of the offender's community status. On July 9th, 2025, wearing a jail uniform and saying nothing to the court, Ben McLemore was sentenced to 100 months, over 8 years in Oregon State Prison. The mandatory minimum sentence under Oregon law left no room for leniency. Ben McLemore's career statistics were 556 games, 9 points per game, 36.3% shooting from 3. But that only tells part of the story. The numbers can't capture the weight of unrealized potential. There's no question in my mind that Ben McLemore could have been a role player in today's NBA. You're telling me that Ben McLemore couldn't do what Malik Beasley was doing this past season with the right team? But the numbers can't capture the weight of unrealized potential, the burden of being labeled a bust, or the tragedy of a man who rose from poverty only to imprison himself through his own actions. His story serves as a stark reminder that athletic talent without character leads to nowhere, and that opportunity without wisdom is worthless. The player once compared to Ray Allen, who Bill Self called as talented as just about anybody we've ever had, who had a 42-inch vertical and the perfect shooting form, will spend the next 8 years in an Oregon prison cell. His freedom traded away for a few moments of horrific and despicable decision making. From selling out Allen Fieldhouse to sitting in a jail cell, from lottery pick to convicted felon, from poverty to promise to prison, Ben McLemore's fall from grace is complete. The boy who grew up microwaving water for warm baths made choices that cost him everything: his freedom, his reputation, his family, any last opportunity at the redemption story that once seemed possible when he was a Houston Rocket. The black cloud his mother saw hovering over him proved prophetic. The 36-point game against West Virginia seems like a lifetime ago. The Ray Allen comparisons ring hollow now. The street named in his honor, Ben McLemore the third place, stands as a monument to what might have been. In the end, Ben McLemore's greatest opponent wasn't a defender or a coach or even his own confidence. It was the man in the mirror. The kid who fought his way out of poverty couldn't fight his own demons. The player who survived the chaos of Sacramento couldn't survive his own choices. The shooter who could score from anywhere on the court couldn't escape the consequences of what he did on a couch in Lake Oswego. Ben McLemore's story is over. The only question now is whether other young athletes will learn from his devastating fall before it's too late.